Welcome everyone to this week's edition of our virtual network organization meeting. I'm really delighted today for our member spotlight to introduce you to Susan Montanaro, who's going to speak with us on person-centered coaching. Susan is a professional coach. She's a mentor. She's a certified holistic health and wellness counselor, and a very well-seasoned sales strategist. So this combination of really wonderful skills supports all of the projects that she takes on. And Susan is also the host of Dreams and Detours, which is a podcast that she runs. And I had the great pleasure of being a guest on Susan's podcast around this time last year, I guess it was. It was really wonderful. It's a show that's focused on talking about the life that you plan to have versus the one that you're actually living. So her career has spanned traditional branded entertainment to new media technology. And as a former media executive, she has previously partnered with global brands to create relevant marketing messages to audiences nationwide. And right now, Susan is actually in the process of earning her Master of Social Work degree. She graduated with distinction from Fordham University, and she has a Bachelor of Arts degree in clinical social work. So Susan, without further ado, please take it away. I'm so honored to have you today.
I'll be able to share my screen, correct?
We're going to make that happen right now.
Thanks for having me, everyone. It's really good to see you. I haven't been around, but that's school just sort of taking me over. So thank you for having me today.
The sound is really soft for me. Should I just turn up my volume or is it on the other end?
She's good for me, but I'm not sure. How is everyone else's sound?
Susan's a little quiet on my end too.
Okay, let me know if this is any better. Did it? Okay.
Yeah, it's still a little quiet, but I have my speaker all the way up to 100, but I can hear you.
Bear with me one quick second. I'm going to make a quick change.
It's still quiet.
Yep. Okay, let me know if this is any better.
Much better.
Excellent. It was just a technology issue. Okay, so can everyone see my screen right now, more importantly?
Yes,
Excellent.
and I would love to be in that water right now. Just
Exactly.
FYI. Okay.
This is so serendipitous that when I went to put a few items on a slide, that these were the images that were afforded me right there, stock photos. So I was pleased. So like Mick mentioned, I am a professional coach. I tend to lean a little bit more toward life and wellness categories, but not only. I made the change several years back when I realized that this was an area that I actually excelled in quite diligently with colleagues and friends. And so finishing up my degree in social work as well as pursuing a career in coaching made a tremendous amount of sense for me. I like to work from a person-centered approach, and I'll share that with you today, what that means, and just some of the elements that I consider to be helpful as I inspect different parts of the process in which I coach with people. So when I begin my work with others, I do not arrive with an agenda. I tend to come in with a goal of just assisting my clients to bring them their truth, their reality, and bring that to the surface. I find that when we can be specific and person-centered, we will look to identify their challenges and to dig around to see what their needs might be. We are, after all, individuals having this collective experience. And so each person has strengths and weaknesses and desires. And the question really becomes, how do we take all of those parts to create a life that is satisfying for them? We begin with, or I like to begin with, who are you? And it might seem really basic and very, very simple, but I ask the question at least 5 times, because I find that when I do that, I'm able to get a slightly different answer each time. And quite honestly, the individual ends up being able to dig a little further inside themselves to talk a little bit more about who they are. I then move forward with, what do you want to change? And are these changes that you are considering coming from someone else? Or are they your expectations and your interests to change? Because often people are tied up in what is expected of them. I then like to move onward to the why. Why do you want to change? And I will ask this one also 5 times, because is this the right time? What is it exactly that you would like to see become different or have different in your life? And more importantly, what would happen if you didn't change anything right now at all? What would that outcome look like? So when we begin, most people I find don't necessarily know about the who and the why, and therefore the what. And it takes a little bit of digging and excavation to sort of narrow down the focus on what it is exactly that's either holding them up or that they have in mind for themselves, and how do we further cultivate that? It immediately takes us into this idea of one size does not fit all. There has been a tremendous increase in coaches and the coaching profession. And of course, this informs us to the need that exists, which is terrific. People are seeking and starving for support and guidance. But dare I say, validation as well gets mixed in with that. And it comes with a variety of styles, structures, and programs from the individual coaches that are now out and about in the world looking to help us. This variety almost feels like a variety of diets. Again, one size does not fit all. And so therefore, some of those programs and structures are really very good for some, but they just are leaving out many people who don't wear that well, who can't just adopt a structure and something that's just presented to them without it being a bit more personal and a bit more specific to them. When we look at what some of that could be holding people up, I find that fear is real and it tends to kill dreams. When we explore the parts of a person where they feel most confident and where they feel calm, we can often take that and start building off of it like it's a foundation. We start where they are. I meet them where they are so that we can say, this is where you feel good. And from there, how do we keep doing more of that? And how do we bridge that, of course, eventually over to the areas that might be, a bit scary or daunting or preventing you from being able to take the leap and take the next steps toward change. As you can imagine, those changes can be a variety of things. They can include your career path. They can include your relationships that are or are not working, moving towards somebody, moving away from someone. They could include just having a conversation about why you would like a promotion and how you ask your boss for a raise. They could include your diet guidelines and how you can motivate yourself to feel healthier and to reach for some of those goals that you continue to set but can't seem to achieve. So there's a wide variety of ways in which we can approach this and reasons that I might work with someone. And some of those are very much wrapped up in how fear can kill the result we're looking for. The starting place, it's different for everyone. I think that's what this theme is about for me today, sharing with you that person-centered and person-focused coaching is really about knowing that everyone has a different capability and that we need to be able to hone in on where those blockages lie, because fears are real and they interfere with our health and our life, and they're personal, they're very specific. Beyond looking there at the fears, we move on to following your gut is only helpful sometimes. And I really do believe that. We've come into a space where we hear a lot about gut instinct more than ever now, which is wonderful. People learning how to trust themselves, people learning how to feel within themselves that something might be off or that they might be in harm's way even. And I think that when that is the case, when you are compromised, using your gut instinct is wonderful. I mean, that's magical, and that's safety at its finest when you really think about it. But then there's intellectual humility and recognizing that we all have limits to our knowledge And that in order to remain open and curious and continuing to learn and grow, we would want to not have the know-it-all syndrome. And that's where gut instinct might prevent us from being able to do that. So when I'm working with clients, it's another item, an area that can sometimes come up depending on the person. We want to make sure that we have a better handle on that. My favorite one, and this is something that I've talked a lot about over the years, but I will say that Kelly Corrigan, the author and writer, really nailed it well when she put out a more concise way of saying and, not or. And what that means is that we've slowly been conditioned to think in terms of the or. It's like a very selective type of thinking. You're either here or you're there. You either have this or you have that. You are good, you're bad. You're right, you're wrong. And I think being put into that mold and being assumed to be in one particular bucket is not helpful, not for you, the individual, and certainly we shouldn't think of others that way. For example, I am strong and I need support. And so it's a kind of a cool way of starting to consider or reconsider the way in which you not only think of yourself, but the way in which you might view others, pulling that judgment out and seeing people as and, not or. And there's a lot of, like, I could tell you off the top of my head, there's a lot of political examples that I could use right now, but I don't really want to turn it into that theme. But when you start to think about it, people are more and than they are on the or side of things. So just more to think about. The next would be compare. I consider it a dirty word. I think it's an unfortunate thing that people tend to do to themselves and to others. I don't find it helpful. And I will say that it's unhealthy and it keeps us running in place if we allow ourselves to waste time comparing to others. It's almost impossible to fully realize your dreams, your goals, and to recognize yourself if you're always looking outward and you're not looking inward. Social media has amplified this very long running pastime, of course, and it's spinning people around and around. It tends to reduce our own authenticity, and really in any form, it tends to be unhelpful. So again, if I'm working with someone who tends to lean more toward compare, looking out, seeing that everyone else's life is perfect, or that they need to measure themselves and their success using a scale that's just inappropriate and wouldn't really fit or make sense for them, I'd want to move in and help them to resolve and remove some of that, because it wouldn't actually help us get to their end goal. And then moving further in to the deeper parts of our thinking and our being is mindfulness. It is essential, and it's very much associated and tied and tethered to meditation, because it's a practice. One is a way of thinking and one is an actual daily practice, but it could be used beyond just a yoga session or, being on the mat. Leaning into being present really allows us to focus on what is actually happening right now and turning off the noise in our mind to give ourselves the freedom to be fully present. Sitting quietly will absolutely help you to develop this skill, but so does dancing and singing your favorite song. Any form of you paying attention to the things that matter to you and being joyful in your moment will bring you back to you. And being mindful has much to do with remaining open and curious and being right here, right now, connected to yourself. And so for anyone who finds mindfulness to be daunting or a challenge that they've yet to explore for some of the feelings that they have associated with it, I say, put on great music, dance, find those outlets that actually help you associate you with you. And then moving to the last point for today would be, are we communicating or just taking turns speaking? I'm really, really big on communication and the lack thereof. I talk about it very often on my podcast because I fear we are losing our communication skills more and more with technology. I think that technology is wonderful, but it certainly shouldn't replace the way in which we do communicate. And communicating is about listening. It's not just about taking turns speaking. It's like, why do we bother coming together if we aren't going to listen and perhaps learn something new and interesting? When we slow down and we listen to each other, it not only creates a cohesive connectedness that we crave, but it keeps us from making assumptions, which we so easily do now because our brains are just moving at rapid speed. We're multitasking. We're not usually focusing in on one thing at a time any longer. And we're losing that beautiful essence of being able to hear what someone else is saying and not just think about what we want to say next. At some point, it's all about going around and taking turns. And we need to be able to do that in a way by listening so that we do not reduce the effectiveness of communication. So these are some of the places that I like to start when I'm working with clients. It always depends on them. I like to, again, keep this very person-centered because we are not in a place any longer where we can just sort of have, like I said, that one size fits all and there's your remedy. It's not something you can just pick off the shelf and say, okay, I'm just going to have this or I'm going to drink that and it's going to solve all of my issues. It really will depend on the person, because at the end of the day, change is, it's only grand in retrospect. It takes all of these bite-sized pieces and steps to build almost brick by brick. I tend to say that often too, brick by brick, toward the change that we're hoping to achieve and the change that we're hoping to see. And so in a nutshell, that's the genesis of what I like to do in the core. It certainly isn't the limitation of where I'll go with clients and how I'll work things out and help them along. Of course, seasoned professionals are in a different bucket or in a different role and mindset sometimes. Other times that's not necessarily true, but it often has a lot to do with, again, where the person is in this very moment. And so that is a lot of what I like to start with. I also happen to love this quote by the poet Rilke. I believe I'm saying the name right all the time, although I could probably be corrected. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. And that is what I have to share with you today.
Great. Thank you, Susan.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So, I'd love to open it up for questions or feedback for Susan. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is this, what I think many people encounter, when they're trying to either grow their business or expand or perhaps even start a new business, is the fear that they have internally versus the expectations. When you mentioned that earlier, I can think of situations where, even in my own journey, right, I've had ideas about a certain way of doing things, but also thinking about, well, what are the expectations, right, against that? So how would you address that with someone? I feel like that's a tough, area, right? Is that when you have a gut feeling about something, and I know you said that, the gut feeling may not always be the way to go, versus expectations of maybe family and friends, right? So it's really like pushing yourself to get out of your comfort zone. Anyway, just wanted to have you comment on that a little if you can.
Yeah. So when you say expectations, do you mean like if you are the responsible person financially in your household? Do you mean it in that vein? Or do you mean like the image and the way in which people would prefer to see you living your life?
Right. I think I think of both, but more the latter, where, I'm thinking of some young people that I've talked to recently, recent college grads, right? Who now have these wonderful degrees, but they're not really liking the field that they're in, but the expectation is that they should go into this or they should go into that, So meantime, their immediate circle is, sort of guiding them in one direction, but their heart maybe is really taking them somewhere else. So, battling through that can feel like I think can be a huge sort of challenge for people.
Yeah. So, I mean, all right, if that's let's use that as the perfect example. If that's the situation a person finds themselves in, I will say this, If it's a function of there not being work available to you right now, but it's still something that is of interest to you, then you'll do what you need to do to fortify yourself in the now, hopefully on the periphery of the field that interests you, and in some capacity. Maybe you want to write about it if you have writing skills, if you can't be in the middle of it. Maybe you want to blog about it or vlog, do the video version or podcast. There's always ways that you could be on the periphery of a field that maybe you're just having a tougher time breaking into. But if you have a degree in something and you're realizing, maybe I had an internship, or maybe I've investigated this and it's no longer appealing to me, and I just cannot see myself going down this road, don't go down that road. Trust yourself in knowing who you are.
Mhm.
That's okay. Because if you aren't going to acknowledge it now, it's going to creep up with you at some point down the road. You can force yourself to put the square peg in the round hole now. What happens in 15 years when you have a mortgage and maybe you have some kids or other items that are, burdensome in a way that keep your hands tied or make it a bit more difficult for you to shift out and shift over? There's also the other flip side of that, which is perhaps some of this is a passion that you would like to pursue separately and in a non-financially driven capacity. So you'll find work and career down this other road or continue to explore what that means for you, but you'll volunteer or you'll do some additional things as it relates to this because you could take those skills and that learning and apply it in some way.
Right.
And that might just be something that's valuable still.
Awesome.
Hi,
Thank you.
Karen.
Yes, hi. I just would like
See
to
you.
follow up. Hi, great to see you again. Literally.
Yeah.
To follow up based on my own experience as a career as a longtime lawyer in very large law firms for decades, really. I know that it took me 10 years before I had that aha moment. You know what? I actually like doing this. I hated the first 10 years of practice. Why is that? I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't want to admit that I didn't know what I was doing. We didn't call it imposter syndrome back in the 70s, but in retrospect, that's what that was. I, in fact, was as good as anyone else at my level, but didn't feel comfortable doing it. But I stuck with it. For a variety of reasons, I didn't believe I had a choice, not just external influences, but financial influences and family relating interests and so forth. And what I find now in a lot of the young lawyers that I've encountered as mentor and as members of bar association committees and even as their supervisors in law firms is that many of them, unfortunately, mostly women, but not only women, don't have the foresight or the courage, let's say, or the long-term view to see past the first 10 very difficult years of learning to be a lawyer in practice. And how can you integrate that dynamic into the very important and certainly legitimate position to take? If something doesn't feel like you right now, don't go down that road. I mean, how do you balance that?
Yeah. So first of all, I wouldn't make the decision for anyone. My thoughts would be someone shouldn't pursue it, but I wouldn't flat out just say, give it up, hang it up, throw it out. Don't bother. That would certainly not be how I would address the person. But in the area of someone saying, I'm not happy with this, or I'm not finding the comfort or the interest or the desire, there would be other areas to inspect and look at. I think we'd need to dig into, some of those whys. What parts of it were alluring to you and attractive? What areas did you actually study in school and lean into in terms of, like, let's use law? What areas of law? Were there other areas that you'd like to explore? Are there forums for you to come together with young people starting off their careers in this profession? How do we connect you to places and other resources that could guide you and maybe remove some of the fear or some of the concerns that you have and decipher whether it's a lack of desire and interest to pursue and go down this roadway? Or is it just that you have not ingratiated yourself enough to be able to see some of the valuable parts and contributions you could make, and therefore receive some of that benefit and that excitement that comes with doing a great job and feeling really good about the work that you're able to then put in?
Yeah,
So-
I'm just gonna, I won't stay on. I want to give other people a chance, but if you have a chance to be mentoring and coaching other young lawyers in particular, especially during this difficult time where they see that they don't have a future after they got their law degrees. One area that I found very helpful for me during that difficult period was getting involved in bar association committees, where my opinion was respected. I was able to contribute to documents. I wasn't getting paid, so I didn't have to worry about competing with, other people who demographically were more preferred than women in the 70s were. But it's an opportunity to show that you can do something productive. And I find that even today as a 70-something, where I really am not as desirable to be retained as an attorney in the retail market as I was maybe 20 years ago, but I'm very involved in bar associations, and that makes me feel still fulfilled and excited about my profession. So
Absolutely. I think my brother actually did a lot of that himself in his first few years. So it's so nice to hear you say that. Yeah, it's a great outlet.
That's really good feedback, Karen. I think,
Thanks.
yeah, no, that was great. I read something recently that, and I'm trying to remember if it was on LinkedIn or somewhere else, but most people are not happy in their jobs. Most people are not happy doing what they're doing. And when I read that, and I forget the statistic, but it was really high. I don't know, Susan, do you know, is it like 70 or 80% or something? It was a really high number.
It is really high. And I have to be honest, I don't have the exact number, but I have to be honest. I think some of that is very much correlates back to having to make this decision about who you are and what you're going to be at a time when you haven't even had self-exploration.
Right.
And I think it's terrific if you already have ideas and you know the pathway that you'd like to go down in terms of academics and your studies and what you want to pursue. Again, that's not foolproof because we know that people come out of different, schools and higher education still feeling confused or conflicted or have changed their minds entirely. But I think that there's a lot of pressure to know what you want to be when you are 22 years old. And I think that that's hard when you haven't figured out who you are yet,
Right, it is hard. And I think a lot of it is the outside influences, like the expectations of society in general, et cetera, that play in. So it's really interesting to explore. And I thought, well, what can you imagine if more of those people followed their heart and really wound up loving what they were doing? How would that impact the world, right? So
or using it to actually love it, right? Like sometimes it's not the traditional path, like even like if you're a lawyer, maybe it's not the traditional pathway that it once had always been. Maybe it's doing something completely out of the box with that law degree that, all of a sudden you're breaking down barriers to what the profession could look like.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. And I think it's so inspiring for people to be really courageous enough to say, oh, you know what? That's not really what I'm meant to be doing. And thank you, Milka. She just shared with us in the comments that it's in Forbes. This might have been where I saw that, Milka. 85% are unhappy in their jobs, according to the survey. It's a really big number. So anyway, that was wonderful. Thank you, Susan, for sharing. And I would invite all of us on this call to think about, who we know that might be able to benefit from Susan's work, her expertise, her knowledge. Again, that's what we're here to do sort of as this networking community, is to help one another, right? So let's think about that as we transition into the member mingle portion of our meeting, which is where we'll go into groups. I think Chris maybe will help us to do that. But before we get to that, any other questions or feedback for Susan? Milka, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome back.
Am I too loud?
No, I just turned you down. You're good. Go.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be back. I've missed you guys so much. I've been gone for several months. So lovely to be back. I love my coach community. I have a lot of coaches, Susan, that are just part of my life. Have always been a part of my life, even before I found coaching, and I can't imagine doing anything else. And one of our favorite conversations when we're meeting inspiration is to ask each other, why do you do this work? What about coaching makes this your thing, your journey, your passion?
You're asking me. Yeah.
I'm asking you. Because I love the answers. They're always inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a very interesting and strange, life so far. It was a tumultuous upbringing. It was trying to figure out from a young age, what direction should I be pointing in? What is my path? What is my passion? Who am I? I had all of those questions for the longest time. I was in survival mode for the majority of, I would say, the first 15 or 20 years of my adult life, working and getting by and doing what I had to do to have a successful career, but really out of a function of survival, which was not ideal on the back end of it all. Even though it was great, I had a great time, I succeeded, I achieved so much, and I had a good life. It's not anything to complain about. And it really wasn't until I realized that my skills were more on the emotional intelligence side of things, and that I was forever coaching people within the structures that I worked. Whatever job I was in, whatever teams I ended up leading, a lot of those skills would emerge in my friendship circles as well. In my family, I found myself very drawn to that. I did end up attending the Institute for Integrative Nutrition 15, 16 years ago. And so in an effort to help myself and heal myself from a wellness perspective, that was another area to pursue. And I realized, wow, that kind of goes hand in hand with so much of the work I'm doing, with people already. And so it was really just a function of realizing when I got the chance, when I gave myself permission to pick my career in my 40s, this was the right path to be on. And this was the one that felt right, made the most sense. And I literally, when it dawned on me, I was like, how could you not have known that, like, your whole life? Like, how could you not have recognized that in yourself? And so my why is that it's where I'm meant to be, and it's where I feel I'm doing the best work and being in service.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
I would just like to
much.
say that I'm meant to be in the area that is Susan's virtual background.
Yes.
That is meant to be my apartment.
too.
I wish I knew where it were.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Susan, thank you so much for the presentation. Chris, I think we can stop the recording there.
Great.
Okay, thanks,
Stopping
everyone.
now. So
Appreciate
thank you
it.
so much, Susan.
Thank you.
Chris. Thank you.
All right.